So I urge you as a prisoner of the Lord, and I beg you that you walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called, in all humility and in gentleness and patience, with forbearance toward one another in love, diligent always to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Because you see, there is one body and there is one Spirit. Just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father who is over all and through all and in all. See, I did what Mike Rogers just did. I broke the cadence. But to each of us was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. Why did I emphasize that? Because today's message is all about the measure of the gift that you bring to this family. We're talking today about the one body, the one family, the uniqueness of this place. It's already been pointed out in the prayer that Kyle led that we have been richly blessed in the last 5 years. From the very first gathering of this group, I believe it was in a living room somewhere, to moving into this building now about 9 months ago, to where we sit today. From a dozen, roughly, souls to whatever this number is today. And all of that has happened because there has been a desire to create the oneness and to recreate what we see in the body of Jesus himself as a man, oneness. Everything about Jesus was united to one purpose. There was not one shred, not one molecule of disunity in his body, in his flesh. Everything about him, from the flesh that he dwelt in, to the mind that he possessed, to the external things that touched his life, everything was so orchestrated in his body that he was perfectly aligned to accomplish the will of God. That's our goal here. You say, that's a lofty goal. Yes. The reading that I just shared with you from Ephesians chapter 4 is echoed in other passages. In fact, it's one of Paul's favorite themes. He mentions it in the Roman letter in chapter 12 and in the letter to the Corinthians in that 12th chapter of the first letter to them. By the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your service, your reasonable, your spiritual service, some translations say. And as you read those words from Romans 12, which is specifically where we'll focus this morning, what you're going to find is that you are in there. You are in there. Each of you are in there. It is by the mercy of God that you're in there. And I like the way that Paul opens that passage when he makes that statement. By the mercies of God, because of the mercies that God has granted towards you. That's why you're here. You wouldn't even be part of this if it wasn't for the mercy of God. How often have you looked at someone traveling a very difficult road, maybe one that is filled not only with discouragement and pains of this life, but one that is filled with evil, one that is filled with things leading them away from God by their own choice? And have you ever made the statement, there but by the grace of God go I? If God hadn't chosen to open a door and to let my heart be receptive to that message, by the mercies of God. Mercy is withholding what we deserve. And it is by the mercy of God that he is withholding from me what I truly deserve. I stand before you today as evidence that God can take just about anything and turn it into something useful in his kingdom. We spend a lot of time in our culture trying to tell everyone how valuable we are. We do it in so many ways, subconsciously, for the most part, I think. Through the ways that we dress and what we do and how we present ourselves. We want people to think highly of us. We want a reputation that's of value. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be presentable to the world in that way, but strip all of it away. And if you had to stand here today and confess all of your sins in great detail, what one of us could walk out of here, but rather fall to our knees and crawl out? There is oneness in this body because we realize not only our strengths, but we are also cognizant of our weaknesses. And we all know that we're here only by the mercy of God. I have a lot of visitors in our audience today, and I want you to know that if you're looking for a place where you can be part of a body, part of a family, don't make the mistake of thinking, well, I don't know if I can fit there. As you look around at those of us who are striving our best, please know that we first and foremost realize it is only by His mercy, because of His mercy. And you know that mercy that He has granted toward us is what motivates us to be who we are trying to be, to bring every thought into captivity to Christ, as Paul would say. To strip away the world so that we can become so focused on Christ that we can try our best to become Him in the flesh. That's our goal. Because that's the only thing that makes sense. He says, because of that mercy, present your bodies a living sacrifice. Every time a man historically has tried to approach God, a sacrifice has been involved. You can go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and you can see Cain and Abel. And you'll note that even then, when men tried to approach God, it was always with a sacrifice. As they're cast out of the garden and sin is entered and there is a need for an intermediary, there's a need for reconciliation with God, what happens? Sacrifice. And in fact, if you'll remember, why did Cain kill Abel? It was over sacrifice. Abel offered what God had requested, even though we aren't told that prior to those sacrifices, But what we know is that Abel offered from the flesh, from life. And you know, ever since then, God has required life. It's ugly what sin does. Sin is such that the only thing that can make up for it, the only thing that can bring reconciliation between man and God is in some way an offering of a life. It happened with the blood of bulls and goats in Hebrews 10. It happened way back again with Cain and Abel and their storyline. It happened when Jesus died so that He could save us from our sins. And we remembered that today as we took the bread and the wine, as Rishi pointed out. But it happens every single time a person falls to their knees before the Father and says, I surrender to you. There is only one thing that makes sense to acknowledge the mercies of God that have brought us to this place, and that's the presentation of our bodies. There's a life again. As a living and holy, and what does it say next? Sacrifice. It is always required. And so nothing is new here. It is just more fully understood. I have news for you. In eternity, it's going to be the same way. The only ones that will be one with God in eternity will be the ones that have given everything. They will be one with Him. I love that imagery. The Bible speaks of how we will reign with Him. And some people think, wow, how is that going to be? Well, friends, that's always been the intention. When Adam and Eve were placed in the garden, what were they told to do? To have dominion over all that has been created and to rule over these things. Why? That was always God's plan. To share His reign with us over this creation here. Eternity will be no different. It won't be a beautiful beach if you're Mike Tackett, or a garden if you're Bobby and Bernice Wolf, where we sit and sip lemonade or iced tea and have nothing to do all day but just watch the sun roll around. Eternity will be a place of sacrifice again. The reason we will reign with Him is because our desire to be one with Him is so full and will be so fulfilled. There will be nothing but His purpose. But the purpose of God is never stale or stagnant. I don't know what eternity holds for us in exactness. But what I do know is it is a place for people that have been transformed. It's reasonable. He is our reasonable service here and over there. The service, the worship notes what homage is due to God. It's what's appropriate. It's what's reasonable. He spends the whole rest of this chapter telling us the manifestations of these gifts, of what this service is supposed to look like, and points out that it's never the same for any two people. We're in a world that has flipped truth and what is reasonable on its head. You've seen it. We see it in the mixing up of society, in the way that we're trying to diminish all of the roles of men and women and try to mix up whether there even is such a thing as a man or a woman. And can you believe that we've come to the point where now fistfights happen over the definition of what a woman is? Does that blow your mind? The mixing up of all of this, getting things into a position where everything, and where there's a word people love to throw around these days, it's equality. One of the great lies is that there is anything such as equality, the way the world tries to calculate it. It just isn't there. It's not there in society. And every time men try to create it, you end up with something like socialism that destroys the very essence of what value there ought to be in life. It's a race to the bottom. Everything falls to the lowest common denominator. And that's the vulgar nature of humanity. But in Christ, we seek not equality the way the world seeks it, but we seek unity. And there's a difference. While equality tries to make everyone a hand or a foot, unity recognizes the value of the hand and the foot, and how different that is. When I look across this audience today, I see the hands of the Lord, the eyes, the feet, the mouth. I see the cradle, if you would, the arms that hold, the nurturers. And they're all here in this passage. Many members, he says in verse 4, but all of the same body. And as he says in verse 3, it's a oneness, it's a unity that comes through this recognition of our diversity and a realization that in humility, not one of us is any better than any other. And so the foot rather, cannot say to the hand, well, since I'm not you, I'll just leave. I'm of no value. And even the passages that speak of the stronger and the weaker parts of the body, those aren't referring to weakness as in less valuable. In fact, in those passages, the weaker parts, like in 1 Corinthians 12, the word weak is vulnerable. A weak part of the body, according to the thought of that day, were the lungs and the heart. And so the rest of the flesh is designed to come round it and to protect it and to cradle it. And even now, naturally, if under attack, you do what God created your flesh to do. You protect the parts of your flesh, of your body, that are most vulnerable. And if someone's coming at you with a knife, the hand sacrifices itself in an attempt to stop the attack. And if the attacker gets closer, we turn to push our back toward it. What is all of it about? It's protecting those parts that are so precious and valuable. We have vulnerable parts of this body. We have the tenderness of some of the women that are here. I better reword that. All of our women that are here. There is a tenderness, isn't there? And the call is the protection of those parts of our body that really represent, and we say it all the time, the heart and soul of who we are, and the gentleness and the care. They're the loving ones. The oneness of the body. We pull together, and I was reading through this list this week, and I was thinking about who you are, and I'm not going to call any names from this podium today because I would never want to try to take someone's offering that they've given to the Lord and to use it in such a way that it might create embarrassment for them or a cause of pride that they would reject. But oh my goodness, what we have here. There was a lady who's here today who this last week made it a point to say to me, Mike, I appreciate your messages of encouragement. And I wrote it down because I wanted to make sure I said this correctly. But don't you think it would be good if maybe you could also offer some praise to all of the things that the people here do. You know, that stung a little bit, not because I didn't think it was true, but because I struggle with that. And you say, why in the world would you struggle with praising folks for the things that they do in the body that are good? Well, I guess there is a reason. Do you remember in Luke 17, there is a parable that is told? It starts in verse 7. Luke 17. Which of you, if you have a slave who's plowing or tending sheep, will say to that slave when he comes in from the field, come over here and sit down and eat with me in my table? No. But instead you say, go prepare something for me to eat, and properly clothe yourself, and serve me until I have eaten and drank. And then afterwards you can eat and drink. He doesn't thank the slave because he did the things were commanded for him to do, did he? You in the same way, do all the things which are commanded of you. And after you have done them, can say nothing more than we are unworthy slaves. We have done only that which we should have done in the first place. I guess that's the way I feel so often. And maybe that's the reason my preaching sometimes comes across that way. I don't know about you, brothers and sisters, but it doesn't matter what I give to the Lord, I always feel like it wasn't enough. I really feel that way. I always feel like, how in the world can I feel like David, what can I possibly give to the Lord for all of his benefits toward me? And that sticks in my heart. What can I possibly give back? When I've done all that has been commanded, all I can say is, I've only done what was expected. And I don't know about you, but even then I always feel like I still didn't do it very well. You can ask my wife, I never step out of this pulpit saying, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Never. Usually somewhere between here and home, I'll make finally the courage to say, well, what did you think of the message? And she'll say, oh, I thought it was good. What did you think? And I'll say, I thought it was horrible. I didn't say anything I meant to say. Didn't come out the way I wanted it to come out. And she says to me, you always say that. Don't? Yes, she's nodding her head. I always say that. So if there are times when when it feels as though I'm maybe not as complimentary as I should be, I guess what I want you to know is every time I preach, I'm preaching to me more than I'm preaching to you. That verse in Luke forces me to always try harder, to always do more, to always see what was missing rather than what I did right. An audit really is only an audit because it points out where the mistakes are. Confirmation of what was right is what you expect because you should have done it right to start with. Nevertheless, the Bible does say things like Hebrews 10:25. Encourage one another. Encourage one another. And there's a time for that. Encourage one another and build each other up, Paul said in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11. And 3 verses later, he says, you admonish the idle, you encourage the faint-hearted, you help the weak, and you learn to be patient with all. That's what he said for us to do. And in all that is encouragement. I look around what happens here each week. And this, if you're not part of this congregation, these are things you wouldn't know necessarily, but we try our best to do things here in a different slant with a mindset toward ministry. We don't like using words like programs, and we like ministry because ministry is what is your calling? What is your gift that's supposed to be implemented? And we have so much that happens here. We really do. You know how many people volunteer time for activities that take place here and have found a place for themselves to serve and have created a spot there because that's where God put them. And God does put us in the body, it says, as he has desired. That's not something we do. We're members of the body that he has put here as according to the allotment of our faith. In 1 Corinthians 12:8, it says he has placed us in the body as he saw fit. So if you're here, God saw fit to put you here. And whatever gift you have, God saw fit to put you here because of that gift. And now it's your obligation to figure out how does that skill go to work? And there's so many of them. How many people are there, men and women, who serve in the ministry of teaching our children? I love talking to the teachers after they come out of their classes. How was your class this morning? I like asking the ones that teach the kids more than the adults, because you adults can be mean sometimes to teachers. I'm kidding. Sort of. But the kids, they eat it up. So I grabbed some of the kids as they came out of class this morning and said, what did you learn? And they remembered. That's because someone has a ministerial heart toward the youth. The ones that come to each week and prepare food and the huddles, activities that we have, and teach the classes and lead the discussions. What about all the people that showed up when we had Vacation Bible School? I hear that Eddie Crane is actually can do construction. He's a carpenter. I didn't know that. See? Learned something about him. I said I wouldn't call any names, didn't I? Well, not all of those were really perfectly made, so there you can take the pride out. What about the people who visit, that make it to hospitals? What about the ones that go visit our shut-ins? What about the ones that are participating in the worship service we just started over at Lindale Living Facility, retirement facility? What about the people who make phone calls and offer letters and cards of encouragement? What about all the people that gathered down here over the last week or so and put together the backpacks to give to children who are going back to school? What about the ones who've devoted the last 3 years that I'm aware of in a ministry to help develop our worship leaders? And once a week, every week, for 3 years, they've come down here working on those things. What about that? What about the people that have invested hours and hours in the building and grounds? What about the people that have invested time in putting our bulletins together and maintaining our webpage and our YouTube channels, and the ones who handle all the AV stuff that happens and the recording of classes? What about the people who spend time in the food preparations and when we have potlucks or gatherings, or when there are meals that need to be given to people who are homebound? I could go on and on and on. That is all worthy of praise to God, because He gave you to us. And where would I be if it weren't for the people who could do that? We can all say that, right? Where would we be? I am amazed at the gifts we have here. And I'm impressed. And I'm grateful. And I'm thankful. And I think that is the exact vision of what the body of Christ is supposed to be. You see, each one of us have gifts that differ according to this grace given to us, verse 6, Romans 12. So let's exercise them accordingly. If you have the gift of prophecy, do it in accordance to the proportion of your faith. If in service, then serve. How? However your level of service manifests itself. If you're a teacher, teach. If you're one who can exhort, then exhort. If you're one who has been blessed and you can give, then do it with liberality. Amen. If you can lead, do it with diligence. If you're one who can be merciful to people that are hurting, do it with cheerfulness. Let's love each other without any hypocrisy. Let's together as this body abhor the evil and cling to the good. Let's be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Let's give preference to each other in honor. Let's don't lag behind in diligence, but let's be fervent in spirit. Let's serve the Lord. Let's rejoice in hope. Persevere in our tribulations as we struggle through this life together. Let's devote ourselves to prayer. Let's contribute to each other's needs. Let's pursue hospitality. Let our faith grow to the point that we can bless those who persecute us. Let's rejoice together with those who are rejoicing, and let's cry with those who are crying. Let's have the same mind toward one another. It's not equality. It's unity and diversity. Let's do that. Let's don't be smart in our own estimation, but rather let's associate with those who are lowly. Let this be a congregation and a body where we each bring to the table what we have, and no one is lacking in any area. Because if there's a shortcoming, somebody's there ready to fill the gap. And in that, we can be what we've been called to be. Thank you for what you bring to this place and to this body. Now, having said all of that, I have to go right back to one of the places I started. And I have to remind us that even in the midst of all that we have been granted by God, let's never forget, all we have done is what was expected. So don't pat ourselves on the back too hard. Let's do it better.